Sports talk where your voice counts. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. Now, from the Sunbury Motors Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15, Elmels Wharf. Online, sunburymotors.com. Ford Kia Hyundai, the best in new inventory with great warranties. Fabulous pre-owned inventory with the Sunbury Motors guarantee. Great service department to back it all up every step of the way. All at Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15, Hummels Wharf. Online, sunburymotors.com. Joining us from SI.com is Mark Wogenwrich. Do we have him all set there? Yes, we do. Hello, Mark. How are you today?
Doing well, Steve. How are you?
Doing great. Great to see you here last week.
Yeah, that was great. That was a good time.
When you go to something like that, and there's obviously multiple interviews to be done, what did you learn that maybe you had not known about before that you can convey to the readers?
I think one of the most interesting things to me, and there was a lot of talk about current roster and, freshmen coming in, how do they look, all that sort of thing. But Andy Frank, player personnel, their director of player personnel, whose actually title is now kind of a general manager, right? General manager of personnel, was talking about the June recruiting period. And one of the things he mentioned that was interesting to me was the fact that, with the amount, they're going to have something on the order of like 50-ish official visits, and coupled with the camps, they're going to have several thousand players at their camps. And Andy made the point that this is a lot. I mean, this is a lot to organize, to orchestrate, to keep track of, to entertain, to fuel, to everything to do. And this is June. This is the kind of month that a lot of us will, out here in the real world kind of unplug from a little bit. Maybe we try to decouple ourselves, start vacations, or think about vacations already. We try to decouple a little bit from work. June might be the busiest month of the year for the coaching staff and for the football staff at Penn State. And Andy said something that really fascinated me. Is like people on the outside who look at us and see, well, you're coaching, all you're doing is coaching football, and June's the off season. No, June's probably the time we're the busiest. And if you would look at our mental health in June, that you might be surprised that this is not like the month for mental health at the, where our mental health is at the best in the workplace. I found that to be fascinating to me because we have this impression, or we have this vision of football coaches living in the football offices and watching film from September through December, and then they unplug. But no, especially in college, maybe there's that bit in the NFL, but in college now, with the way the recruiting calendar goes, June is just as busy a month, and probably just as hectic and as tense a month as the season. I found that to be that really took me back. The way he framed that answer, that really that made me look at their staff in a bit of a different way.
I think if there was a tip-off to that, Mark, it would have been 2 years ago coming out of COVID. Yep. Because when they were able to get face-to-face and get camps back and get people on campus, Penn State's recruiting took an incredible turn, and I think that's the tip-off as to what June means when they finally were able to get back to the kind of June that they're used to having.
Exactly, but now that the way you've contracted the calendar, forcing players to essentially to have to commit earlier in order to sign earlier. There are expanded number of visits. Everything, in some ways rightfully is geared to the player being able to make the best, most informed decision that they can. But on the other end, you've got to. These are coaches who came out of spring, and it's not just at Penn State. This is across the country at that level of football, coming out of spring practice, and then your evaluation period in May, and then all of a sudden you're hit in June with this essentially this period to build your roster for the next year, 2, 3, 4 years, that is the most critical time of the year. I just, I just found that to be a really stark admission. Because you think, well, then when do you grade? You get 2 weeks break in July? They'll send everybody, on vacation in July before coming back to start camp and stuff like that. There should be, I don't know the answer to the calendar, but there should be more, I think, hard stops in recruiting.
I do too. I do too, because I think guys need breaks.
Yeah.
They keep talking about how the players need a break, Coaches need a break too.
Yeah.
Staff needs a break. I want to continue, though, on the Andy Fisher and Andy on Andy Frank part, because the reason because James made a big deal out of Andy, and I've talked about Andy many times, but you look at the numbers. People always are looking at transfers, in, out, recruiting numbers. He's the one that takes care of all that. And it seems like when people are saying, well, they're at 89, they got to get to 85, Andy always seems to have that under control. And I find what he does amazing.
The fact that he can be so collected about that, too, they probably have. Again, he's managing. It's like he's managing, a Major League Baseball roster or an NFL 53-man roster, and then a sub-roster in a way, or he's managing a Major League Baseball roster and a AAA roster at the same time. That he's just him and his staff. They have to, and they have to do it over the periods of years because they know attrition, natural and otherwise. So the fact that you can be at 89, 90, 91 scholarships at a certain period, but have an intrinsic understanding that you will be at 85, that you might even be below it because you know internally what is going to happen, and then you can, even if you're at 89 scholarships and say, well, we still have room for, a tight end from the transfer portal or anything like that. That's an enormous amount of work to be able to manage that with the absolute wholesale changes in roster management that have come over the past 3 years in college football. There's little wonder that I think, and Andy mentioned when he started in 2014, it was he and basically an administrative assistant, and now there's
right.
More than a dozen. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you're talking about more than a dozen people to manage a roster, and it's essential. It's essential to build out in order to compete at the level Penn State is intent on competing at. You need to be a corporate entity in that way, and that's the college football. Through all these changes that I think a lot of us are struggling to keep pace with, or at least to process, and to be in Andy's position and just say, I don't have the luxury of living in college football 1994 time. I just don't. We're playing college football in 2024 time, and I have to manage a roster that assesses itself on today's terms and tomorrow's terms. It's the amount of change in his world over the last 3 years is enormous. I liken it a little bit to the amount of change kind of in the journalism world, really, but over the last 2 decades or so, but even the last 10 years primarily, he manages a lot. There's just no question about it.
When you had a chance to talk to others, whether it was assistant coaches or Chuck Losey, what did you learn there?
Chuck Losey likes everybody. He's not big on giving a ton of names. The one thing I did ask is, because he was talking about individual players and how they're making, the strides they're making in the off season. And I just said, there's the Athletic does that freaks list. Who might you nominate for that? And he was he was reticent. Obviously, he's not going to come out and say everybody because, James Franklin says say one player's name and mention somebody else. Maybe that has an effect. I don't know. One thing he did say that I thought was interesting was that Nicholas Singleton, if he would put anybody on there, it would be Nick Singleton from the perspective of how not his numbers, not from a testing numbers perspective, but from how he approaches the game. He actually compared him. He said he's similar. He has a similar sense to Saquon Barkley in how he approaches the game off the field. In that, the gains that Saquon made from his freshman to sophomore year were absolutely enormous, and he's seeing Nicholas Singleton kind of make those same strides. I was struck, too, because one of my stories for the preview magazine, coming up, the Town and Gap preview magazine this summer, was about the defensive line. And James Franklin was not asked about the defensive line during his session, but went out of his way to mention particularly the tackles, how the defensive line is really growing into a strength. And by growing into a strength, I mean that some of the tackles also are growing in addition to being talented, and there being depth there. Their guys are getting bigger. That's one of the points that James made last year, especially after that Michigan game. Some of our guys just have to get bigger, and he's seeing that. He's seeing that from players like Zane Durant and Hakeem Beamon. He mentioned Devon Elise, who was a 300-pound guy anyway, but he mentioned these guys as working in ways that he hadn't really seen before, and I really like that. The other thing I thought was really interesting was Jaywan Sider talking about Trey Potts, the running back who came in from Minnesota, and said that he has to be really impressed as a coach with a player who's willing to come into a running back group like that. I mean, this is paraphrasing the quote from Jaywan Sider. We lost 4 running backs to the transfer portal because of those 2 freshmen last year. And here comes somebody who wants to come in. When you're talking about adding players via the transfer portal, is that not what you dream of kind of as a coach? You don't necessarily know what you're going to get with him as a player. There could be a great benefit there. You could find a perfect niche for that player, but you're getting somebody who already is coming in who seems to fit that room really well. And I think that is the kind of thing that you've seen Penn State do in the transfer portal very successfully over the past 3 years, is bring in players who are not just good players, but add to their culture, don't just fit in, but they add something to it.
Yeah, and there's no question. And look, let's face it, I think what Jaywan Sider tried to do is he kept telling him, here's the deal, here are these 2 guys, are you sure you want to go, you sure want to go? And Potts was absolutely sure that he wanted to be there. He wanted to play whatever role in big games, and I don't think he felt like he had that chance, especially to play in big games at Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I mean by players coming in who add to your culture. It seems like
yes.
it seems like, I think Chop Robinson really is doing that. I interviewed him over the summer, and I think he's really doing that. I think you saw that with Arnold Ebiketie. I think you'll see that with some of the other players, too. That they add something. You don't just ask these players to come in and fit what you do. You do, but you also want them to bring their experiences in and have that be beneficial. Like, there is something that Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, they're going to be able to learn from Trey Potts. He's going to be able to teach him something about his time in Minnesota,
mm-hmm.
or about watching the way he used to watch a guard, make a move or something like that, and how he would work behind that. He's going to be able to give them something, and if they're sponges, like we hear that they are going to process that information and make it work for them. And if that's what you get out of him, you get a couple of carries a game, maybe reception, but if you get him to be that kind of player for your younger running backs who can give them something else that they need to succeed, then you've hit a home run out of the portal with him.
A year ago, Mark, there was no question, even though they had not achieved the 11-2 record yet, I think all of us knew, just standing there, who the leaders were and how strong they happened to be. Did you get a sense from everybody when they talked where the leadership is coming from with this group?
I think they're still figuring that out. I'm sure specific players are going to make those strides. But I still think they are looking for guys to bring themselves into that role. I know we use the word organic a lot. It's overused. But leadership, I don't think in leadership, because you had it in such strong ways last year, it can't just be players then divined to the next group that's let's say P.J. Mustapher and Sean Clifford say, these guys were really good leaders, and I think they're going to step forward. That's great, but they have to take those roles and initiative among themselves. I mean, I would look at a player, even somebody who we haven't seen on the field a whole lot. A guy like Nick Dawkins, who I actually was able to get to know in high school a little bit and wasn't able to play last year because of an injury. Going into his third year, I would expect a player like that, because his personality, he has a very strong, I think, leadership-style personality. And it comes from the things that he also does off the field, too, starting his foundation and being involved in Live for Life, that sort of thing. I think he has an element of that. Now, whether that can translate, how that translates into the room, if he's not a starter, that's what's interesting to me. But I think, I just look at a player like that as being someone who can do it. I mentioned Devon Elise. In an interview with him, I heard somebody who I thought had a very strong leadership personality, and he's somebody who P.J. Mustapher had mentioned as well. So those guys have to take their steps. The quarterback is always going to be your main leader, I think, and we'll see how Drew Abo-Prabula handle that. I don't see them having the Sean Clifford presence yet, but they're second-year guys too, so they're not going to. So I think is a demonstrable place where they're going to need it. I don't know that they're going to have that core, that those real strong, I think, Jair Brown, PJ, Sean Clifford kind of, even Chris Stoll kind of players. This might be more of a group kind of initiative, and that maybe they don't have the giant personalities, the 5th and 6th year seniors who have been around, seen it all, done it all kind of people, that it's going to be maybe a little more collective effort.
Mark, always a pleasure. It's great seeing you last week. I know I've spent a lot of time talking with you, and I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good seeing them. Maybe next week, too, I guess, Live for Life?
Live for Life next Thursday, the 22nd. Yep. Sounds great.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Mark Wogenwrich, SI.com. See, there's a guy that knows how to have fun. They don't, no complaining. Just, fun guy.
He is a fun guy. I've had a couple of good times with Mark in the press box at Beaver Stadium.
Fun guy. Some other people just want to complain when people try to have fun. Like, okay. Yeah. All right. Fun. Fun.
No, señor! No, señor! No, señor!
You need to work on your fun quotient. And why do I sense that we are not done with rants today?
There might be something still left.
Oh, of course there is.
But today was a lighter day than yesterday, I can say that.
All right, we'll come back more in a moment. Great to have you with us today on News Radio 1070 WKOK.